Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going deep on something I think a lot of you will find really relevant. We're going to be talking about relationships with a narcissist. More specifically, a narcissistic husband.
That's right. A lot of people reach out about this topic.
It's one of those things that can be super confusing and honestly really draining to deal with.
For sure.
And we really want to kind of give you guys some tools and insights to help you navigate this tricky situation.
Exactly. We're going to break down like all the complexities, the whys behind their behavior, and how to protect yourself, which is probably the most important part of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So first things first, when we talk about a narcissist, what's really going on like beneath the surface?
Well, it's interesting because despite the outward appearance, they seem so confident and self-important, but deep down, they're actually grappling with intense insecurity and low self-esteem.
So it's almost like a facade, like they're projecting this image.
Yeah.
But internally, it's a totally different story.
Exactly. And because their sense of self is so fragile, they need constant validation and control.
Oh.
It's like they have to build themselves up.
Got it.
By putting others down.
Wow. So that sounds exhausting.
It can be.
No wonder these relationships could be so draining for the other person.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Narcissists are super sensitive.
Oh, really?
To anything they perceive as a threat.
A threat to their ego, I imagine.
Exactly. So even the smallest criticism can trigger a defensive reaction. Like they might lash out or become aggressive or try to manipulate the situation to regain control.
So how does someone who is in a relationship with a narcissist even begin to navigate that minefield? Because it feels like you're constantly walking on eggshells.
You're so right. And that brings us to a crucial point. Boundaries.
Boundaries, yeah.
Establishing and maintaining clear boundaries is so important.
Especially in this type of relationship.
Absolutely.
Because those boundaries are what protect you.
Right. Exactly. It's all about communicating what behavior you will and will not tolerate.
Right.
For example, let's say your husband calls you names when he's angry.
Yeah.
A firm boundary would be to say, I will not be spoken to that way. If you continue, I will leave the room.
Okay, that's a really good example.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering what happens when a narcissist inevitably tries to push those boundaries.
Right.
Because I can't imagine they're just going to roll over and accept them.
You're exactly right. They will test the waters, see what they can get away with.
Right.
That's why consistency is key. You have to be unwavering.
So it's not just about setting the boundary. It's about actually enforcing it every single time it's crossed.
Every time. And the consequences have to be meaningful.
Okay.
Walking away from the conversation, refusing to engage in arguments that are going nowhere, or even temporarily leaving the house to give yourself space.
It sounds like taking a stand can be really difficult, especially when you're dealing with someone who's really skilled at manipulating and, making you feel guilty.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to remember that you don't have to do this alone. Having a strong support system is crucial.
So that's friends, family, maybe even a therapist.
Exactly. Anyone who can offer a different perspective and remind you of your worth.
Because when you're in it, I imagine it's really easy to start doubting yourself.
Right.
Questioning your reality.
Absolutely. Narcissists are masters of manipulation. They twist situations, gaslight you, make you believe their version of events, and you're left feeling completely disoriented.
100%.
That's why those outside voices are so important. They're like a reality check. They validate your experiences, help you see the situation more clearly.
It's like they're your anchor, keeping you grounded when the narcissist is trying to pull you into their storm.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And they can offer practical support too,
Good.
Like helping with childcare, offering a listening ear, or just being there to remind you that you're not crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because even with the best support system in the world, I imagine it can still feel really isolating being in a relationship with a narcissist. Like you're trapped in this bubble of their creation.
You're so right. It can be incredibly isolating.
Yeah.
And often that's by design.
What do you mean?
Well, you see, one of the tactics narcissists use to maintain control is isolation. So they try to limit your contact with friends and family, maybe criticize your loved ones, or even try to turn others against you.
So it's all about keeping you dependent on them, cutting off any other sources of support so they have more power.
Exactly, which is why maintaining those outside connections is so crucial for your well-being.
Right.
It's about reclaiming some of that control.
Wow. I'm really starting to realize that navigating this kind of relationship is about so much more than just like setting a few boundaries. It's like shifting your whole mindset,
Absolutely.
reclaiming your own sense of self.
You've got it. You are not responsible for fixing the narcissist.
Right.
You are not responsible for their happiness, their behavior, or their choices.
It's so much easier said than done.
Oh, I know.
Especially when you're constantly being bombarded with the blame and guilt.
Absolutely. But a crucial step in reclaiming your power is shifting the focus away from trying to please them constantly
Oh.
and more towards taking care of yourself.
Okay, so what does that actually look like?
Okay.
Like, what are some concrete steps someone can take to prioritize themselves in this kind of environment?
It starts with recognizing that your needs and feelings are valid.
Yeah.
You deserve to be treated with respect, kindness, compassion.
But how do you do that when you're constantly being told you're wrong? You're overreacting, like you're the problem. It's so hard to hold on to your own reality in that situation.
It is hard, no doubt about it. That's why self-care is so important.
Okay.
Carving out time for activities that nourish your soul. Whether that's spending time in nature,
Yeah.
reading a book, connecting with friends, maybe pursuing a hobby.
Anything that reminds you of who you are outside of the relationship.
Right. Exactly. And it's about starting to challenge those negative voices in your head.
Yeah.
The ones that tell you you're not good enough. You're to blame. You deserve to be treated this way.
That's where the support system comes back in, I imagine, to kind of help you reframe those thoughts.
Exactly.
Remind you of your strengths.
100%. And remember, you are not responsible for your husband's behavior. His actions are a reflection of him, not you.
It's easy to fall into that trap of self-blame, though,
It is.
especially when you're constantly, being bombarded with accusations and criticisms.
Absolutely. And it takes a toll on your mental and emotional health.
Right.
But remember, you are worthy of love and respect,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what the narcissist is trying to tell you.
This has been so insightful. I feel like we've covered so much already.
Yeah.
From understanding like the roots of narcissism to the importance of boundary support systems. I'm wondering, though, where do we go from here? What are the next steps for someone who's realizing they're in this type of relationship?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we're going to dive into in part 2 of this deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore concrete strategies
Awesome.
for managing the relationship, protecting yourself, and ultimately making choices that prioritize your well-being.
Can't wait.
Okay, so in part 1, we really dug into like the heart of narcissism, the importance of boundaries, and of course, having a solid support system.
And those are like the foundation, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
But now let's get practical. Let's give people some actionable steps they can take to navigate this.
Okay, cool. So we've laid the groundwork, but, when you're living with a narcissistic husband, it's not like you can just like snap your fingers and change the whole dynamic overnight.
Right. No, definitely not. It's a process.
Right.
Requires patience, self-awareness, and a lot of resilience. And I think it starts with really solidifying those boundaries we talked about.
Okay, so it's not just about setting them once and hoping for the best. It's like actively maintaining and enforcing them.
Right, exactly. Narcissists are experts at pushing boundaries. They'll always test you, see what they can get away with.
Right.
So you have to stand your ground.
Okay. Can you give us some like specific examples of how someone might actually enforce those boundaries in an everyday life?
Sure. Let's say your husband constantly interrupts you when you're talking.
Yeah, a classic.
Right. A clear boundary would be to say, I'm not finished speaking, please let me finish my thought.
Yeah.
And if he continues to interrupt, you might just remove yourself from the conversation. Say, I'm happy to continue this when you're ready to listen respectfully.
Okay, so it's about taking action.
Absolutely.
It's not just letting it slide.
Exactly. Actions speak louder than words. If you're consistent, follow through with consequences.
Right.
It sends a strong message.
But I'm wondering, like, even with the best intentions, it can be so hard to like stay strong when you're facing their manipulation.
Oh, for sure.
Because they're so good at guilt tripping, playing the victim, turning things around on you.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so important to create some emotional distance,
Oh.
even if you're living in the same house.
So like protecting your own energy, even if you can't physically separate.
Yes, exactly. So that might involve setting boundaries around the time you spend together, focusing on practical matters rather than those heavy emotional conversations. Or, even having separate spaces in the home where you can go to recharge.
So it's almost like creating like a sense of peace
Yeah.
for yourself amidst the chaos.
Yes, your own sanctuary, prioritizing your mental and emotional well-being.
Right.
Which isn't selfish, by the way.
Right. It's essential.
It's essential.
Yeah. Okay. I'm starting to see how this all connects. Setting boundaries, creating distance, having your support system. It's all about, like, taking back your power.
Right. Yeah.
Protecting yourself.
Exactly. It's about not letting them control and manipulate you.
And another thing we touched on before is, like, not taking on the responsibility of fixing them.
That's huge. It's not your job to change their behavior, make them see the light, or cater to their every need.
And that's going to be such a tough concept to grasp.
I know.
Especially when you're with someone who blames you for their unhappiness all the time.
Yeah. It's easy to think, if I just try harder, if I love them enough, they'll change.
Right.
But the truth is, real change has to come from within.
Mm-hmm.
You can't force someone to be self-aware or empathetic.
So it's more about letting go of that fantasy of changing them.
Yeah.
And focusing on what you can control.
Exactly.
Your own actions.
Yeah.
Your reaction.
Right. And that can be so empowering. Instead of wasting energy trying to fix someone who's not willing to change, you can use that energy to build a healthier life for yourself.
But I'm thinking, like, what happens when all of that, the boundaries, the self-care, it's just not enough? What are the other options?
Well, then you might have to make some really tough decisions. Couples counseling could be an option.
Okay.
But only if both people are willing to put in the effort, really commit to it.
But we've talked about how unlikely it is for a narcissist to change. So I'm wondering, how effective can counseling even be?
Honestly, it's a long shot. Narcissists often see therapy as a way to prove they're right, not a chance for self-reflection or growth.
So what happens when counseling isn't an option? Or it just doesn't work?
Well, this is where things get really hard and honestly painful to talk about. But sometimes the healthiest choice, even with all the coping mechanisms and boundaries, is to leave the relationship.
Wow. That's a huge decision.
Yeah.
And I imagine it comes with so much fear and guilt.
Yeah.
Uncertainty.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, there's no judgment here.
Right.
It's such a personal choice.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong answer.
But I'm sure the pressure, both internally and from society,
Oh, I know.
can be immense.
Yeah.
We're told to stay in relationships, make it work.
Especially in marriage.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially when marriage is involved.
Absolutely. But it's so crucial to remember your well-being comes first, your mental and physical health.
So how does someone even begin to think about leaving a narcissistic partner? It sounds so complex and potentially dangerous.
It is. It's not a decision to take lightly. It often requires careful planning, legal advice, creating a safety plan, and slowly untangling your life from theirs.
And all of that while they might be trying to control you,
Yeah.
manipulate the situation, sabotage things.
Exactly. You have to be prepared for their reaction. They might beg you to stay, become angry, or even more controlling.
So you need a lot of strength, support,
Yes.
and a deep understanding of how they operate.
Absolutely. And that's why we're here, giving you the knowledge, the insights to help you make informed choices and put your well-being first.
Because knowledge is power.
Right.
Even in these tough situations, understanding what's going on can give you back some control.
Totally. And while we've been talking about romantic relationships, a lot of these insights apply to other parts of life too.
Well, that's a good point. So those narcissistic tendencies, they don't just exist with husbands.
No, not at all. We see them in families, friendships, workplaces. Recognizing those patterns, it can be really helpful in navigating those relationships too.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about dealing with narcissistic husbands. But, it's not just romantic relationships where this comes up, right?
No, not at all.
You can see these tendencies in other parts of your life.
Yeah. Family members, friends, colleagues.
Bosses.
Yep, even bosses.
So how do we take what we've learned about dealing with a narcissistic husband and apply it to those other situations? Are the strategies kind of the same?
Pretty much. I mean, the basic principles are the same.
Yeah.
Recognize the patterns, set boundaries, and protect yourself. Put your well-being first.
Okay, so recognizing the patterns, what are some signs that someone might be showing those narcissistic tendencies, even if they're not your spouse?
It's really about how they make you feel. Do you always feel drained or like they're manipulating you after you've been around them? Do they constantly interrupt? Dismiss your feelings? Always turn the conversation back to themselves. Those are all big red flags.
So it's not just about their words, it's about how their actions and words make you feel.
Exactly. And also pay attention to their empathy. Do they have any? Do they take credit for other people's work? Blame others for their own mistakes?
Yeah, those are all pretty classic signs.
Absolutely.
So once you've kind of spotted those patterns, What's next?
Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Just like we talked about with romantic relationships, you gotta have those clear boundaries to protect yourself. In any relationship with someone like this.
Okay, but boundaries with a coworker or a family member, that feels way harder than with a spouse. You can't really just limit contact as easily.
Yeah, it's trickier for sure, but the idea is the same. You're communicating what's acceptable to you and what's not. So, politely disagreeing with them, maybe skipping those events that you know will be emotionally exhausting, or even being careful about how much personal stuff you share.
So it's about being smart, picking your battles, and really focusing on what you can control.
Exactly. You don't have to fight every fight. You don't have to try to change their mind. Sometimes it's better to disengage. Just walk away, change the subject.
It takes a lot of self-awareness, doesn't it?
Definitely. Knowing when to step in, when to back off, and when to put your own needs first.
Right. And it's okay to put yourself first, even if it's your mom or your best friend. You don't have to sacrifice your own well-being for them.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about protecting ourselves from their behavior, but is there any chance of actually changing the dynamic? Can we help them become more self-aware, more empathetic?
Honestly, the chances of you changing a narcissist are pretty slim.
Right.
Real change has to come from them.
So we're not trying to fix them.
No. You're focusing on managing the relationship in a way that protects you, not trying to change who they are.
That's a good point. It's about accepting them, limitations and all.
Yeah, and sometimes that means creating some distance. If the relationship is hurting you, it might be time to step back.
I imagine that's a tough call to make, especially when it's family or close friends.
It is, and don't hesitate to reach out to a professional if you need help with this.
A therapist can be a great resource.
Definitely.
Well, this has been such an eye-opening deep dive.
We've covered a lot.
From the basics of narcissism to dealing with it in all kinds of relationships. I think the biggest takeaway is that understanding this, it really gives you power.
100%. When you understand narcissism, you can protect yourself, set healthy boundaries.
And make choices that are good for you. You are not alone in this.
No, you're not.
Recognizing these tendencies, whether it's a spouse, a family member, whoever it is, that's the first step to building better relationships in all parts of your life.
And with that, I'll leave you with one last thought. How can understanding all of this empower you to make positive changes? Not just in your own life, but in the lives of the people around you.